On a cold and gray night in Chicago, as the wind sliced through the corners and the rain drummed on the asphalt like it was trying to wake the whole city, a young woman with silent steps walked down the hallway of a senior care center. She wore a worn-out coat and carried in her eyes a quiet sorrow, the kind that's not obvious at first glance but lives there, behind the silence. Her name was Emily Dawson, 26 years old, a night caregiver, always assigned to the cases no one wanted. Patients in vegetative states, those forgotten by their families, the ones who no longer had a voice. That night, Emily was heading to room 312, just like every Tuesday. Inside, lying between white sheets and discreetly placed tubes, was Mr. Walter Bennett, 82 years old, a man who had once been famous, celebrated on stages around the world as a classical violinist, but who now lay motionless, as if his story had been forgotten, along with the last note he ever played. No one expected improvement. No one believed he'd react, not even the doctors. But Emily believed, not in miracles, but in gestures. She entered the room, checked the vital signs on the machine's display, and then, without much thought, sat beside him and began to sing. An old jazz tune, one of those that seemed to smell like vinyl and glow like a sunset. The music filled the room with unexpected tenderness, breaking the heavy silence like a warm breeze in the middle of winter. It was soft, imperfect, but honest. Emily sang not to heal, not to impress. She sang because she felt it, because deep down, she still carried the melody as part of who she was, even if the world had taken almost everything else from her. But what Emily didn't know was that someone else had heard her song that night. Just outside the slightly open door, standing in the hallway, unable to take another step, was Liam Bennett, 34 years old, Walter's son. A man with a serious face, a tailored suit, and the tired eyes of someone surrounded by technology and urgent decisions, but who no longer remembered what it felt like to feel. He was there out of obligation, or at least that's what he told himself. He only visited his father to make sure everything was in order, that the bills were paid, that the facility was up to standard. But something in that moment made him stop. Something in that unfamiliar voice pulled him back to a nearly forgotten memory. His mother smiling to the sound of an old record, his father on the violin, and him, just a child, laughing without knowing why. Liam couldn't move. The song seemed to pierce through bricks, through routine, through the emotional walls he had built over a lifetime. And for the first time in years, he didn't look at his father as a sick body, but as a man. A man who, despite all his flaws, was still his father. And all of that, because of a stranger's voice. Outside, the rain kept falling, indifferent. But inside that room, something invisible had shifted. Something silent and powerful, like a well-played note. That night, 3 lives, a forgotten caregiver, an unconscious man, and an emotionally exiled son, began, unknowingly, to tune their hearts to a new melody. A story no one saw coming. A song that, however unlikely, was just beginning to be written. Before becoming a caregiver, Emily Dawson was a rising star. Her name, still little known outside Chicago's jazz circles, had begun to echo through bar tables and smoky clubs. She sang like she was telling secrets, with that kind of vulnerability that silences a crowd even when the room is full. She didn't need spotlights, her voice was enough. It was as if each note told a story she herself didn't know how to end. But promises are sometimes made to be broken, and hers was shattered cruelly. It all began when she met Derek, her then manager and boyfriend. He seemed to believe in her more than anyone. He had charm, charisma, and spoke convincingly about contracts, recordings, and a bright future. Emily, driven by passion and hope, trusted him, so much that she handed over her savings, her career, and her heart. And that's why the fall hurt so much. Derek disappeared one ordinary morning. Took everything: money, contacts, recordings, equipment. But the betrayal was what hurt the most. Emily didn't just lose the future she had dreamed of. She lost herself. In the days that followed, she tried to carry on. But the offers stopped coming, the phones went silent, and her reputation sank along with the pain. The few friends who remained told her to sue, but Emily could barely get out of bed. The world felt too big, too hostile. And music, her only language, went silent inside her. That's when, out of sheer necessity, she took a job as a caregiver, a simple ad in the paper. It paid little but offered temporary housing and 3 meals a day. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a stage. It was putting on a uniform, dealing with loneliness, diapers, medications, pain. But there, in that cold space lit by fluorescent bulbs, Emily found something unexpected: silence. A different kind of silence than the one she knew at home. It was the silence of farewells, of lives told in photos on the walls, and rare visits. And in that silence, Emily began to rebuild herself, day by day, gesture by gesture. She never told anyone about her musical past. She kept that part of herself like someone hides a scar. But with some patients, especially the quietest ones, she risked a whispered melody. She sang softly while changing sheets or fluffing pillows. Old songs, like the ones her grandmother used to play on scratched records. Jazz, blues, ballads. Sometimes patients' eyes would light up, other times just a sigh. But it was enough for Emily to keep going. Then came Walter Bennett. When she first saw his name on the clipboard, she didn't recognize it. But later, talking to an older nurse, she learned he had once been one of the greatest violinists in the country, a prodigy, an artist. But now, here he was, just an immobile body, sustained by machines and technical care. The family hardly ever visited. A distant son who rarely spoke to the staff. That's all they knew. Emily felt something different when caring for him. Maybe it was identification. Maybe it was knowing that this man, like her, had lost his music. So that rainy night, without thinking too much, she sat beside him and sang. For the first time in years, her voice came out without fear, without expectations, without an audience. It was just her and him. 2 broken musicians, connected by an absence the world couldn't see. In that room, among tubes and monitors, she began to rediscover parts of herself she thought were gone. And what was supposed to be just another shift turned into the beginning of something more. Something she didn't know how to name yet, but it made her chest ache with hope. The music, silently, had begun to return. And with it, so had Emily. Liam Bennett never learned how to deal with feelings. Yes, he grew up surrounded by music, but not by affection. While the sound of violin echoed through the walls of his childhood home, something essential was missing: presence. His father, Walter, was more known on stages than at home. He traveled the world, ruled by applause and packed schedules, while Liam stayed under the care of his mother, Evelyn. She was the one who cradled him at night, tended to his scrapes, and sang gentle lullabies at bedtime. Walter was almost mythological to his son, admired from afar, unreachable, almost unreal. At 11, Liam lost his mother. A car accident, quick and brutal, took the only person who truly understood his silences. It was the first time he saw his father cry. But even then, amid flowers and whispers at the funeral, there was no hug, no words, just a brief nod and a lost gaze. Walter buried himself even deeper in work, and Liam grew up in the shadow of an absent father, learning not to expect anything. Silence became the norm, affection, a foreign language. Over time, Liam developed what many called a genius for business. He launched a tech startup at 27, and within 5 years it became a national success. He was admired for his discipline, focus, and intelligence, but also feared for his coldness. He never showed emotion in meetings, never let praise or criticism shake him. He kept everything under control, always. After all, it was easier to master algorithms than deal with people. When his father was admitted to the care facility, already in an advanced state of neurological decline, Liam did what was expected. He paid for the best center in the city, hired the most specialized staff, signed the documents, delegated visits to a family lawyer, and moved on with his life. "I'm doing my part," he repeated to himself. And in a way, he believed it. After all, the man in that hospital bed wasn't the father he remembered. He was a body, a name, a responsibility. But on that rainy night, something broke inside him. He had only stopped by the care center to drop off some documents and review contracts. He hadn't planned to go upstairs, not even to go inside. But something made him stop. Maybe the rain, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the weight of living a life without rest. And then, in the dimly lit hallway, he heard the music. That voice, that song. Something inside him snapped, like a string pulled too tight. Liam leaned against the cold wall near the slightly open door, unable to bring himself to enter. The caregiver, he didn't even know her name, was singing with a sweetness that was almost disarming. The song was old, one of those his mother used to play while cooking. He closed his eyes, and for a brief moment, he was no longer the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He was just a little boy in shorts, sitting on the stairs, listening to his mother hum. That night, he didn't enter the room. He didn't speak to anyone. He just stayed there, hidden in the hallway, until the song ended. Then he left quietly, feeling a strange ache in his chest, an ache he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. That voice, unfamiliar, and yet somehow known, had touched him in a way no memory ever had. For the first time in a long time, Liam felt the desire to come back, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because of something he didn't yet know how to name. Something like longing, or maybe, just maybe, hope. The following nights brought an unexpected routine. Emily continued her quiet shifts, tending to her patients in her own particular way. Observing, listening, and sometimes singing. Music had returned to her nights like a secret shared between her and the patients, but especially between her and Mr. Bennett. It was as if that room had become an intimate stage where she could sing without judgment, without an audience, just with the hope that somehow her voice might reach the still man in front of her. What she didn't know was that she was no longer alone. Liam, after that first night listening to her voice through the slightly open door, began coming back. At first he arrived late, when most of the staff had gone home. He stood in the same hallway spot, almost like a ritual, saying nothing, just listening. At first he justified it to himself as curiosity, then as respect for his father. But the truth was that he was being moved, deeply, quietly, by that unknown woman who sang with her soul. Emily sometimes sensed a presence in the hallway but wasn't sure. She thought maybe she was imagining it. Until one night, as she turned to grab a blanket from the room's cabinet, she caught, in the reflection of the window, the shadow of someone watching. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she stepped closer to the door, she found Liam standing there, with a faint, sheepish smile on his lips. "Sorry," he murmured, almost like a teenager caught doing something wrong. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Emily didn't recognize him at first, but his posture, his expression, the expensive suit, it was clear he wasn't just any visitor. "Are you family?" she asked, still surprised. "His son," Liam replied politely. She nodded, not knowing what else to say. For the first time, their roles had reversed. She, so used to being in control of interactions with patients and families, felt vulnerable. But Liam broke the silence with something unexpected. "Your voice. It did something in here," he said, placing his palm on his chest. "I thought I didn't feel anything for this place anymore, or for him. But hearing you sing made me remember who I was." Emily stayed silent for a few seconds, taking in his words. Then she smiled, a small, almost shy smile, but genuine. "Music does that. It reaches places we didn't even know were hurting." Liam took a deep breath and, with a bit more courage, made a request he never thought he'd say. "There's a song, It was my mother's favorite, Smile by Chaplin. Mr. Bennett used to play it on the violin, and she would sing, I'd like to learn how to sing it. Emily widened her eyes in surprise. You want me to teach you? He nodded. There was something quietly desperate in the request, something reaching out for reconnection, for meaning. It wasn't vanity or whim. It was a son asking for a bridge back to a past that had slipped through his hands. I'm not a teacher, she warned. I'm not a singer, he countered with a grin. And just like that, with a simple, honest exchange, something new began. A silent agreement between two people who, until then, had lived on opposite sides of the same abyss. In the break room, between coffee mugs, forgotten folders, and time clocks, not only would improvised lessons be born, but also a delicate connection, a melody made of care, respect, and discovery. And without realizing it, Liam and Emily were about to learn much more than just a song. The lessons began unassumingly, always at the end of Emily's shift, when the hospital had already settled into silence. In the staff room, with yellowish lights and a coffee machine that groaned with every use, Liam would show up with a notebook and the same confused expression of someone unsure of why they were even there. But Emily, with patience and a subtle glimmer in her eyes, guided each step like someone who knew the way even without a map. At first, Liam could barely hit the notes. The music slipped through his fingers like sand. His voice was rigid, restrained, like everything else about him. But there was something touching about the attempt. He truly wanted to learn. Not for pride or challenge, but for something more intimate, more painful. Emily saw that and with each meeting, allowed herself to laugh a little more. She corrected him gently, tapped rhythms on the table, pointed out lyrics with passionate explanations. Little by little, what was just a song became a ritual. Liam, in turn, began to see Emily differently. He noticed the details, how she tied her hair with an old pencil, how she furrowed her brow when searching for the right key, how singing made her forget the world for a few seconds. He began bringing her dinners in glass containers, always from different restaurants, as if trying to discover her favorite flavors. One night, he showed up with a vintage microphone, round bass, 1950s style, just like the one she had casually mentioned when seeing an old jazz photo in a book. When he handed her the gift, he simply said, I thought your voice deserved something worthy of it. Emily was speechless. She touched the object with reverence, like someone finding a lost part of themselves. Gratitude was in her eyes, but also something more subtle, a budding feeling, unexpected, that she didn't quite know how to name. That quiet but solid bond began to be noticed by the few co-workers on the night shift. One nurse joked that Emily was teaching a CEO to sing like Sinatra. Another remarked there was something special between them, even if they never said anything beyond what was necessary. But what was growing there didn't need to be announced. It grew like music, invisible, yet undeniable. And Liam, who had always had answers for everything, had no answers for what was happening. He had never felt so at ease with someone. Emily didn't treat him like an executive, or as the heir of a famous name. She treated him as Liam. Just Liam. And maybe that's why he felt safe enough to make mistakes, to sing off-key, to laugh at himself. Those nights became the only moments when he wasn't expected to perform, produce, or excel. He just had to feel. Walter, even unconscious, seemed to subtly respond when Liam visited after lessons. A gentle twitch of the fingers, a deeper sigh, a peaceful look. Emily would say music sometimes woke memories before the body. Liam wanted to believe that. Maybe he already did. Without realizing it, they were building something rare, a space to belong. Emily, with her buried traumas. Liam, with his long-locked heart. In each other, they were discovering a kind of freedom they'd never known. There were no promises, no certainties. Just an unfinished song, being written by four hands, note by note, smile by smile. And even without saying it out loud, they both knew. They were changing. Together. One evening, as Emily sat beside Walter after another singing lesson with Liam, she mentioned how the elderly patients seemed calmer when they heard music. Some would smile. Others, even without responding to other stimuli, seemed to breathe in a different rhythm. Liam, hearing that, suggested they organize a small performance. Nothing big. Just a musical evening in the dining hall, with warm tea, makeshift armchairs, and gentle songs to soothe the souls of those who carried so much weight. Emily hesitated. It had been years since she'd truly performed, and while singing at Walter's bedside felt natural, doing so before an audience, even a small one, awakened insecurities she thought she'd buried. But Liam insisted, with a new kind of tenderness, almost sweet. "Your voice has already brought me so much peace. I think it could bring them even more." And so, in the following days, they rehearsed more often. Liam, growing more at ease, began to sing with an emotion that even surprised himself. Emily guided him patiently, refining phrases, adjusting breathing, and sometimes just closing her eyes and feeling. They chose a short repertoire, 3 songs, all jazz classics, with a special duet at the end, "Smile," the one that had started it all. On the night of the performance, the staff helped transform the cafeteria into a cozy little hall. Makeshift curtains covered the windows, small lights twinkled softly, and wheelchairs were lined up in the front row, alongside elderly folks with canes and blankets over their legs. The scent of tea and cookies mingled with the faint lavender fragrance that always lingered in the geriatric wing. Walter was carefully wheeled in on his gurney and placed at the back of the hall. Emily made sure of it. When Emily and Liam stepped onto the small improvised stage, a brief silence fell. Curious smiles appeared among the patients. Others simply watched, eyes attentive, as if waiting for something they didn't yet understand. Emily held the vintage microphone Liam had given her like a talisman. He, at her side, took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The first song was soft, a classic Ella Fitzgerald melody. Emily's voice filled the room with tenderness, and Liam accompanied her with touching simplicity. The audience, quiet at first, began to respond, gentle claps, teary eyes, nostalgic smiles. In the second song, Liam sang a few verses solo. There was something raw and honest in his voice, even without technique. Emily watched him with quiet pride. Then came the duet. "Smile" began slowly, with the guitar keeping rhythm. Emily sang the opening lines, and Liam joined in hesitantly, but with emotion. The harmony between them was palpable, and when they sang the chorus together, "Smile, though your heart is aching," there was no longer any distance between stage and audience, between past and present, only feeling. At the back, Walter kept his eyes closed, but his expression changed. A faint crease of emotion crossed his face, as if something within him had been touched. When the performance ended, the cafeteria filled with subdued applause. Many of the elderly cried silently. Others clapped in time with the final note. Emily lowered her gaze, emotional. Liam, still catching his breath, turned to her and said softly, his voice trembling, "Your music didn't just save him, it saved me too." In that moment, under dim lights and open hearts, they understood they were already part of each other. Not by choice, but by need. There, in front of unlikely witnesses, something rare had been born: belonging. The days following the performance were full of lightness. Something had changed in the air, as if a window had been opened in that gray hospital. The patients talked about the concert. Emily's colleagues congratulated her with discreet smiles, and Liam showed up more often, now not just as a student, but as someone who belonged there to that routine. He wasn't content just rehearsing or singing. He started helping in the hallways, pushing wheelchairs, organizing meds, serving coffee, all with a clumsy but genuine touch. Emily, in turn, felt more alive. She was singing again, laughing. And for the first time in a long while, she was falling in love, even if she hadn't said it out loud. The feeling grew in silence, like a song slowly taking shape. Between knowing glances, shared smiles, and brief touches, there was an invisible melody between them that only the two of them could hear. But then, one afternoon, when the sun finally peeked through the clouds over Chicago, Liam arrived quieter than usual. Emily noticed it the moment he walked into the hospital. His posture was the same, the smile still on his lips. But there was something in his eyes that didn't match this new Liam she'd come to know. She waited for him to speak, and he did. "I got an offer," he said, sitting beside her in the staff lounge. "A major merger, a company in Zurich. They want me to go there indefinitely, to lead the transition. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Emily listened in silence, heart heavy. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to stop him. She simply nodded slightly, as someone who understands, even when it hurts. After a few seconds, she replied with calm, "You deserve it. You've worked for this your whole life." Liam took a deep breath. The silence between them weighed more than any words. He gripped his coffee mug tightly and stared at the floor. "But now, I don't know what I want anymore. Before I would have said yes without thinking twice. Now, I keep wondering if I'm walking away from something I've only just begun to understand." Emily smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "Maybe we only found each other in this exact moment because that's how it had to be. Like a rare note that can only be played once. And even so, it was worth everything." He looked at her. His eyes carried everything left unsaid. Affection, desire, fear. For a moment he thought about saying he would stay, but he didn't. Because he knew, deep down, that he had to go. He needed to figure out what all this truly meant. "I don't know how to say goodbye to you, Emily." "Then don't," she replied. "Just go, and take the music with you." That night, Liam walked through the hospital with heavy steps. He stopped at his father's room door, stood in silence for a few minutes, then left without going in. The rain had started again outside, just like at the beginning. But now, every drop seemed to carry weight. Emily went back to her shift, trying to ignore the hole opening in her chest. After all, maybe what they'd lived had been a borrowed miracle, a brief, intense song, too beautiful to last. And even without promises, without guarantees, something between them remained. The certainty that what they shared had been real, even if only for a short time. On the night before the trip, the hospital was silent, lit only by the soft glow of hallway lights and the distant sound of monitors pulsing like electronic hearts. Texto padrone, Liam couldn't sleep. The weight of the decision he would make the next day felt like it was crushing every thought, every breath. He knew that leaving meant more than just leaving a city. It meant walking away from everything that was just beginning to bloom, a melody that hadn't yet reached its final note. Driven by a restlessness he couldn't name, Liam went to the hospital and walked to room 312. There was Walter, still, his face marked by time and silence. Liam hesitated before entering, afraid of what he might find, but knowing he had to try. He approached the bed carefully and sat beside his father, holding his wrinkled hand as if clinging to the last flickering flame of a dying fire. With a quiet voice, almost a whisper, Liam began to sing. The words "to smile" came out trembling, filled with emotion, fear, and hope. The melody Emily had taught him came to life in that moment, crossing the night and filling the room with a tenderness that hadn't existed there in a long time. With each note, Liam felt his heart beat stronger, a connection that wasn't measured in words, but in deep, unspoken feeling. And then, the unexpected happened. Walter's eyes, once closed like locked doors, slowly opened. A faint but real light appeared in that tired gaze, confused but alive. And with a weak voice, almost a sigh, he said his son's name. Liam. It was as if time had stopped. The world outside disappeared. Liam squeezed his father's hand, his throat tight, and called for Emily, who was at the reception desk. When she arrived, her eyes wide, her face lit with a mix of surprise and hope. Liam told her what had just happened. "It's a miracle," she said, unable to hide her tears. The music brought him back. That night, the three of them stayed together. A father returning to life, a son rediscovering hope, and a woman who, through her song, rekindled a long-lost flame. Liam cancelled the trip to Zurich. He chose to stay, not just for his father, but for everything that was starting to rebuild around him. The music had done more than heal Walter's fragile body. It had mended deep wounds, invisible to the eye but deeply felt in the heart. The miracle of that night wasn't just the awakening of a sleeping man, but the rebirth of an entire family. Emily, Liam, and Walter came to understand that love, forgiveness, and music could be powerful enough to make the impossible real.
And in that simple room, beneath the dim glow of the nightlight, a new hope was born. A promise that the past does not define the future, and that reunion can be the beginning of everything.
A year had passed since that miraculous night when Walter Bennett opened his eyes and spoke his son's name for the first time in years. The hospital, once a place of quiet goodbyes, had become a space of life, connection, and music. The geriatric wing had become the stage for a small revolution, a living story born from the voice that returned, the violin that played again, and the heart that finally found a home. It was a sunny spring afternoon in Chicago, and the care center's cafeteria had been prepared for a very special concert. Chairs were arranged in circles, decorated with simple, colorful flowers. Patients, staff, and some visitors waited eagerly for the performance to begin. There was a different kind of energy in the air, a mix of anticipation and celebration. After all, this concert symbolized more than just music. It marked the birth of an unlikely family. On the small improvised stage, beneath the soft glow of modest lights, Walter sat with his violin resting in his hands. His eyes, though aged and battle-worn, now held a flame that once seemed extinguished. Beside him, Emily adjusted the microphone, wearing a dress that evoked her days performing in jazz bars. And there, between them, stood Liam, guitar in hand, smiling with the serenity of someone who had finally found peace. The first note sounded gently, and Walter's violin began to weave melodies that captivated everyone. Emily's voice followed, clear and filled with emotion, singing the songs that had bridged past and present. Liam accompanied her on the guitar, the strings vibrating in sync with his heart. The music filled every corner of the cafeteria, touching each soul deeply and silently. Patients smiled, some waved their hands to the rhythm, and staff members held back tears. Among them, children visited their grandparents, and some families, for the first time, felt that this institution was not just a place of waiting, it was a place of life. The music united generations, stories, and dreams, turning what once seemed impossible into a palpable reality. When the final note faded, a reverent silence swept over the room. Then, slowly, timid applause turned into a warm ovation, with tears and smiles everywhere. Walter looked at Liam, and in their eyes was a connection no words could ever describe. The look of a father and son who had found their way back to one another. And in that moment, on that sacred little stage, Liam stood. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with hope. He looked at Emily, who watched him with teary eyes and spoke aloud for everyone to hear. "Emily, you changed my life and my father's in a way I never thought possible. You brought us back to something we thought was lost forever. I don't just want to spend the rest of my days with you. I want to build a future together." He then knelt down, took her hands, and asked the question he'd carried in his heart for months. "Emily, will you marry me?" The silence that followed was filled with tears from everyone watching. Emily, overwhelmed with emotion, didn't need a second to think. With a smile that lit up her face and a joy she hadn't felt in years, she replied, "Yes, Liam, I will." The cafeteria erupted in applause and cheers. Staff members embraced, patients smiled like children, and Walter let out a deep sigh of relief and contentment. It was the end of one chapter, and the beginning of a new story. A story built on forgiveness, love, and music. A story that proved that even in the hardest of circumstances, it's possible to begin again. In the months that followed, their lives became intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. Emily, Liam, and Walter were no longer seen simply as caregiver, son, and patient, but as a true family. They shared meals, laughter, quiet moments, and awakened dreams. The violin and guitar became symbols of an unbreakable bond, and the jazz songs Emily sang now carried them into new chapters. Their engagement was celebrated with a small gathering of friends and hospital colleagues. There, among flowers and music, they toasted not only to love but to resilience, to the courage to start over, and the power of human connection. Emily wore a simple dress, but her smile glowed as if she were on the world's grandest stage. Liam couldn't take his eyes off her, full of admiration and tenderness, and Walter, beside them, felt complete for the first time in many years. That afternoon, as music played in the background and guests danced between conversations and embraces, it became clear that this unlikely family had found their home. A home not built within luxury walls, but within hearts that had chosen one another and healed together. And so, the story of Emily, Liam, and Walter Bennett reached a chapter of rebirth. A chapter where love, music, and forgiveness wove together something true and lasting. A living proof that, even in the face of our greatest losses, the path of hope never disappears. It merely waits to be rediscovered, note by note, smile by smile. So, did you enjoy this story full of music, love, and miracles? If you did, go ahead and smash that like button. It really helps us out, okay? Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. I promise the next story will tug even more at your heart. Now tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments because I love knowing where you're tuning in from and catching these beautiful vibes. So, let's spread this music and love around, all right? See you in the next video, with more stories that'll make you smile. And who knows, maybe even sing along.